Right, awesome. All right, so now that we've started the recording, hello and welcome to this webinar about publishing in the Journal of Global Higher Education. The next slide has our agenda for this webinar. We will do some editorial introductions. We will then introduce the journal. We'll talk a bit about the sections of the journal, and then we'll give a bit of advice and guidance for publishing in the journal. So as far as editorial introductions go, I'm Melissa Watley. I am one of four editors of the journal. I will pass things over to my colleagues to introduce themselves. Whoever would like to unmute and go.
I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Mittelmeier. I'm also one of the co-editors of the journal, and I'm based at the University of Manchester in the UK.
My name's Sylvie Lomer. I'm also based at the University of Manchester in the UK.
I'm Charlie Mathias. I'm based at Old Dominion University in Virginia in the United States.
Yes, and I'll add to my introduction. I am also based in Virginia in the United States. I am at William and Mary, which is in Williamsburg, Virginia. So just a bit of an overview about the journal. So the journal is open access. It's independent, community run. We are a peer-reviewed journal. And the journal focuses on global higher education and the opportunities, issues, and challenges that international and global engagement presents. We are the key publication outlet for Research with International Students, the Research with International Students Network, and the Critical Internationalization Studies Network. About the journal, we are a scholarly collective. We intend to be community run, so while the four of us are editors, we have built a community that will run the journal, and that we hope will take a larger role in helping run the journal and make decisions as we move forward in time. We aim to purposefully disrupt traditional hierarchical models of journal publication and management. We are open to experimentation. We hope that that makes us a bit different from other international education focused journals out there. And we very much value submissions that take a critical perspective on global higher education and that challenge established norms and practices in this particular area of inquiry. About our editorial board, we have two section editors. Pitulia Nikula and Tong Tong Heng are section editors of the critical reflections section and the practice section, respectively. We have a board of associate editors that support the review process, assistant editors that do the bulk of our peer reviews. A bit about the recruitment process. We recruited associate and assistant editors last year. And we had an open call to apply. That way, anyone who was interested in serving in one of these roles could express their interest. We will do so again as we have people cycle off of their terms in these roles and as the journal grows and we need more people to support this work. Our editorial board represents a mix of career stages, a diversity of countries, expertise, and personal backgrounds, which was really important to us as we built the editorial board. In terms of our aims and scope, we welcome submissions that take a critical perspective on global higher education. And again, as I've already said, that challenge established norms and practices in this area of inquiry. We seek to broaden scholarly conversation and to disrupt normative publication practices regarding gatekeeping and participation. We do have some expectations of authors that are important to be aware of if you're considering submitting your work to our journal. First, we expect authors to be aware of the specificities of national context and to situate local practices, research issues, and reflections within a critical awareness of world history and contemporary politics. We do see value in single site case studies in a single institutional or national context. But we do ask for authors to recognize local particularities, explain them, and then identify connections with other institutions, countries, or regions. As far as submission types go, we publish three different kinds of manuscripts. The first one is research articles, and this is what you might think about as your more traditional journal article. These are empirical research articles. They are 8,000 words maximum, excluding the abstract, references, tables, any figures, etc. So that's just the text of the manuscript. Critical reflections are critical conceptual or methodological manuscripts evaluating existing research and practice. The maximum word count for these is 3,000, and that again excludes the abstract, references, tables, etc. And then finally, we have practice articles, and those are manuscripts that highlight innovative, ethical, or critical approaches to working practices in global higher education. And that has the same word length requirements, maximums as the critical reflections pieces. I will turn things over to Jenna to talk a bit more of the kinds of articles that we accept.
Great, thank you so much. So what I'm going to do now is transition us to talking about what we are looking for in articles and the kinds of articles that we do and don't publish. And in doing so, my intention here is to give some kind of insight into how to pass the desk review or to ensure that your article is a good fit and it's likely to be sent out for peer review. I'm mostly at this point going to be talking about the research articles, and my colleague Sylvie in a moment is going to talk about the critical section and the practice section. So in terms of what we do publish, first, generally our scope as a journal is related to global higher education, and any kind of experience, policy, or practice that might happen within that. We take the notion of global to be really broadly defined, to mean that we want articles that we publish to have an awareness of the wider world and the interconnections between contexts, which are not only limited to the kind of barriers between nation states, which is why we've used global instead of the construct of international. But we see higher education as a structure that is globally interconnected, and we want those interconnections to be kind of present in the articles that we're publishing. The most obvious of this is practices in higher education, which are obviously global. Things like student or staff mobility, educational exchanges, the internationalization or globalization of the curriculum and whatnot. But it might also be global higher education practices which are not explicitly global in scope or involve mobility, but have implications for the way that we approach higher education globally as a sector. So we take global as a very broad definition, and we encourage you, if you're not sure if your topic fits within the remit of global, just to be in touch with the editorial team, and we're very happy to give advice. Next, our lens for the journal is that we publish critical research. By that word critical, though, we don't just mean being negative or picking out all of the bad things about a certain practice or policy, although that might be part of it. But we want to publish articles which are reflective generally of established norms and practices, which are cognizant of various power hierarchies and the structures that underpin them, and are asking questions about why higher education functions in the way that it does. And I think that question of why is really important for our journal. We want to question existing practices and the assumptions that underpin them to, really reconsider notions of doing what it is that we've always done. So in that way, we expect articles to be critically reflective in the sense of thinking about where assumptions are coming from and what might be shaping the practice or policy or experience that is being evaluated within the research. In doing so, the point 3 on the slide there, we really encourage authors to draw from a wide range of theoretical or conceptual frameworks, particularly those that are currently underused or are interdisciplinary in nature within the field. That's not to say we won't publish work that uses really common conceptual frameworks. I think, most of us in the field are very familiar with work from people like Bourdieu or Foucault, and we welcome research that brings in these more commonly used lenses. But we would expect this choice to be really clearly rationalized and critically applied throughout the article. So we want to see a good engagement with theory and concepts throughout the work. That then leads to the final bullet point on this slide, which is that we hope to publish new and innovative ideas that make original contributions to scholarly and practitioner conversations about global higher education. So we're really not very interested in work that rehashes findings that's already been established within our field, but rather what we're trying to encourage through this journal is new conversations. There's a major challenge in research related to higher education, and particularly the global higher education discipline, of findings which are very kind of replicated time and time again. Where, just to give an example, we have probably thousands of articles that suggest international students experience transitions with language. Great, but restating that doesn't get us any closer to actually knowing how to address these considerations in our classrooms or dismantling linguistic injustices within higher education. So what we're looking for are novel ideas, things that haven't already been said before, which is something that's very clearly kind of stated within your abstract, your introduction, and your conclusion of your article, really making clear what's the unique contribution of what you're submitting. Could we go to the next slide, please? Some other guidance on what we are looking for. Our journal views higher education as a multidisciplinary conversation where there are multiple scholarly traditions and angles going into how we talk about this topic. So we want to recognize higher education is not just an education research discipline, but is also spoken about through a really large range of different disciplinary traditions. We also see this as a conversation that is global in nature, which means that we don't want authors to assume that their practices are globally understood or valued. So that means articles should be written in a way that assumes a broad readership and provides the kind of necessary context and background for this article to be understood by all. And when I say that, it applies just as much to colleagues who are working in hegemonic contexts where there's a lot of literature and written in places like the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, etc., which assumes kind of global knowledge or global replicability of their context of education. So we want to have the same expectations for all, no matter where you're writing from, that we would expect articles to have clarity and reflection on context as needed for a global readership. And because global is in our title, that is really important to us. I've mentioned we highly encourage interdisciplinary work that draws from various research traditions. But at the same time, we would expect that that is still grounded in scholarship within higher education. Researchers have now been studying higher education as a distinct area of research for several decades. And there's often a challenge of work kind of being presented as innovative in one discipline when it's already well established within higher education research. So if you are speaking from a disciplinary perspective outside of education, kind of alongside our aim to establish new knowledge and conversation, it's important for the work that we send to peer review to have done a good literature search on their topic and making sure to embed the higher education scholarship that already exists beyond the author's specific discipline of writing. In terms of the research design, we apply the same critical criteria here as we do to articles as a whole. And what I mean by that is that we expect some reflection on the underlying structures of power and hierarchy that underpin data generation. There are many approaches to research design which are taken for granted as being, I'm going to put in quotes, high quality within our field, and we encourage authors to be really critically reflective of notions of quality, thinking about how and why behind their methodological choices, and taking alternative approach where that's deemed important or necessary, but also rationalizing those choices in a really high quality way within the methodology section. And then finally, we encourage authors to think critically about approaches to writing and authorship. As a journal, we are not beholden to the typical structures of journal articles. And we do encourage alternative ways of writing. So if you're writing an article and the typical literature review methodology, findings, conclusion approach isn't working for you, we don't have a required format in that sense. And we particularly really encourage decolonial and creative ways of presenting academic work. We also encourage kind of critical reflection on authorship practices in terms of who is included as authors, how that is organized on the paper, and we're open to things like joint first authorship or other creative approaches to authorship. Basically, we welcome creative approaches to knowledge presentation and creation. And if you have questions about whether a particular approach is possible or allowed, or if our system has the internal structure to allow what you're hoping to do with your paper, please just email us before submission, and we're really happy to discuss your idea and approach and its feasibility within the structures that we're working within. Next, thank you. So that then brings me to what we do not accept. And this list is actually some of the major reasons so far since we've opened up to submissions, some of the reasons for desk rejections or our editorial decisions not to send articles out for review. So I think it's helpful to kind of reflect on some of these before making your submission. So kind of aligned with our critical lens, we as a journal, we avoid publishing articles which focus on deficit narratives or framings of student, staff, scholars, national contexts. What we mean by that is that we don't publish lenses which fully frame certain people or groups or countries as lower quality or lacking skills or dispositions required for success. That's not to say that we don't allow focus on very real challenges or marginalizations that are affecting individuals, but that we would reject articles which focus on those challenges without critically reflecting on kind of the structural and hierarchical inequalities that make those challenges visible. So just to give an example, we would see a research question about students' lack of engagement in the classroom as a deficit framing, whereas a more critical framing that we would be interested in as a journal would be considering what structural barriers make engagement seem less visible. So we're looking for articles which evaluate structural inequalities rather than perceived individual deficiencies. Next, we do not publish work whose main findings are descriptive without being grounded in theoretical and empirical literature. So we do expect that authors are thinking about the how and the why behind their arguments and findings, rather than simply conducting research and presenting an answer. So we are concerned with questions like, why does this research matter? Who benefits from these findings? What do these findings mean for policy and practice? And that is a really clear implication for the way you're writing your discussion and your conclusion. Again, not just merely summarizing the findings from the research, but really thinking about those questions of why, who cares, why is this important, why does this research matter? For the same reason, we do not publish research that focuses on undefined experiences, in quotes. So for example, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of articles already about international students' experiences in XYZ country, or staff experiences with XYZ process. And we don't publish this type of approach because we feel the field is already saturated enough with understandings about generic, undefined, unspecific experiences. And we want to encourage authors to move towards being more specific and intentional with their research questions, which then allows for a better engagement with theory and existing evidence. So that's not to say we will desk reject anything that has the word experiences in it, no, but we would want to see that really critically evaluated, as specific as possible, and looking beyond just students or staff experiences in XYZ. Um, Also, relatedly, we don't publish work which outlines findings but does not embed those within wider societal implications or implications for policy or practice. So that should be central again within the way the article is written in terms of answering that who cares question and thinking about its meaningful contribution to addressing systemic inequalities or making changes to the way we approach our practices in global higher education. So always making sure within your submission that the implications of this work for practice or policy in some way is made really clear by the end of the article. Um, as I previously mentioned, our understanding of global means an awareness of the wider world and the interconnections of our sector's practices. Therefore, we do not publish single country case studies which do not reference their transferability or applicability to other contexts. As Melissa said, we do see value in having in-depth single site or single country case studies, but we expect that it would be clear to an international readership what they should take away from this work if they are not working in that specific context. So the readership should be imagined as global, and the findings should make clear their overarching contribution to the global sector. And finally, the easiest one, we don't publish book reviews at this time. I'll hand over now, I think, to Sylvie.
Yes, that's right. So, due to time zone differences, one of the perils of assembling a global board of editors, our section editors, Tang Tang Heng and Pitulia Nicola, couldn't join us today. So, I'm going to be sharing a bit more about the practice-based section and the critical reflection section. So, Tang Tang is editor of the practice-based section, and her email address is on the screen, and I'll put it in the chat as well for anyone who wants to make some particular inquiries. I should say both the practice-based section and the critical reflection section are peer-reviewed. We're applying the same standards of quality and rigor to these sections, but we wanted to have these sections available to enhance the diversity of what kind of publications we can offer. So the goal of the practice-based section is to offer a space that we don't think currently exists in the global higher ed space for articles that are grounded in practice in global higher education to be published. So we're looking for papers that highlight ethical and/or critical contributions and innovative approaches to working practices in global higher education. The first thing that might spring to your mind when we say this is issues associated with curriculum and pedagogy or andragogy in global contexts. So creating an innovative pedagogic approach, for example. But it could also include student and faculty or staff support provisions or development, or even the process for developing those support provisions. You might have interesting insights into how institutional partnerships on a global scale are managed or established. You might have insight into practices around global classrooms or collaborative online learning environments. Study abroad and student mobility programs, as Jenna mentioned, would be relevant for this section as well, as might global programs in formal, informal, or extracurricular settings. Basically, anything that you do in the context of higher education could be an interesting paper provided for this section, provided that there is a global lens and an innovative ethical or critical approach associated with it. So what we're looking for here are papers that, in 3,000 words, manage to engage with applied aspects of global higher education, engage with the relevant literature, especially if an argument is being made that a practice is innovative, for example. It's important to demonstrate what aspects of it are innovative. There would be a lot of approaches to, for example, group-based learning in higher education settings, where I think we would really look for the point of difference given the 20 years of practice and research that we have in terms of group-based learning in higher education. So what we'd be looking for is a strong and clear explanation and justification of the submission's contribution to practice and/or research or scholarship, depending on how you understand and define those different practices in different areas of the world. It can be helpful for that reason, to engage with a strong conceptual or theoretical framework to help to justify that contribution. That's not essential, but it could be helpful. As with all of our papers, as Jen has already explained, we're looking for a clear consideration of a global audience of readers, which means that if there are local or regional specificities associated with the practice or with the policies that govern that practice or make certain things possible and certain things impossible, those will need to be explained to a global audience. Practice papers can, but don't have to, include evaluations or other sources of data like curriculum documents, policy artifacts, project descriptions. They do need to go beyond personal reflection, however, so it can't just be an account of my experiences in using my preferred teaching method. If you're including reflections from the perspective of the practitioner, the person who's designing and leading on the practice, these need to engage with the practice and the implications of the practice on research, policy, and scholarship. One of the options that we'd like to suggest, we haven't been able to do this yet in our first issue, but we look forward to supporting it in the future, is that we could be publishing a research article alongside a practice-based paper. One of the limitations of a lot of the publication venues, and this applies to us as well, is in terms of word count. If you've developed a really amazing innovative practice with multiple different aspects and you've got an evaluation project to publish around it, that's going to be challenging to present in either the 8,000 word research article format or the 3,000 word practice-based format. Put them together though, and in the practice-based paper you can unpack the details of how this practice occurs, what's innovative and interesting about it, what's critical about it. And then in the research article, you can explain the contribution to knowledge that is made through that practice. If you'd like to do that kind of paired approach, we would ask you to please email the journal Gmail address, which I've put in the chat and on the slides here, just for some clarification and advice around framing. The word count is 3,000 words, but this does exclude abstract references and figures, and hopefully that gives you some flexibility. We do have an example of a practice-based paper in the journal's first issue, which is available on the website. Link is also in the chat. We've had very few submissions of practice-based papers so far, so we would really encourage this if this is something that you're interested in developing. So moving on now to the critical reflection section. This is edited by Putulia Nikula, who is based in New Zealand. The critical reflection section is designed to stimulate discussion around problems or challenges existing that are being faced in global higher education discourses or practices today. So again, they are fully peer-reviewed. The scope is very open-ended. The approach could be a critical evaluation or review of some of the different concepts, methods, theories, or practices, or in fact the lack thereof in the field of global higher education. So we're looking for manuscripts here that are relevant to the context of global higher education, highly critical, grounded in existing literature, and are conceptual rather than reporting research findings. We particularly want suggestions for how the field could be moved forwards as a result of this critical reflection and intervention into the research space. Putulia does say, please get in touch if you want to discuss the suitability of your idea or manuscript, and you can contact her directly, or you can contact our general Gmail address and we will forward the inquiry on. Please do keep your questions coming in either the chat or the Q&A function, and I'm now going to hand over to Charlie.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk today about the developmental review process. So one of the things that I think is unique to our journal, not many other places do this, is that we have what's called a developmental review process. So authors who want a little more mentoring, a little more support as they prepare and develop their manuscript, they can submit it to us, and as they submit, they can mark it as they wish to go through the developmental review process. What that means is that manuscript will come into the editors here. We will then send it out for a developmental review. And these developmental reviewers We have asked them to write typically a little bit longer, more constructive review for the authors, with the idea that these papers are going to be revised and continually to be developed. Once you get that back, you as an author, you can then take that advice and comments and then revise it and then resubmit it back in. And then we will start the process for the actual review there. Going to the developmental review process, one thing we want to be clear about is it does not guarantee publication, but we are including this here to hopefully enhance and allow for publication for individuals who may not have that local institutional support, early career, things like this, that they could really use that extra support along the way in developing their manuscripts. Next, just kind of a final word about quality. I think my colleagues have already talked about this in a couple different ways. All three have actually, but when we talk about quality, what we're looking for kind of connections between all the different parts of the paper. Is there the research questions? Are they connected to the research design? Is the literature that's developed, does that support the background in developing the questions there? Is the methods, the data analyzed, are they appropriate to investigating the question at hand? Is the evidence and analysis in line in the findings and the statements of what the findings are in line with the research design? And at the end of this is really, I think the first sentence there really sums it up, is about the paper's rigor, validity, originality, the design. Does it all come together in a coherent package? We do recognize that what is quality to one is subjective, but we do have some ideas and standards that we really push, that we really want to see some of the critical aspects of it, bringing in a wide-ranging literature into the literature reviews. And we are very open to methodologically different ways and viewpoints and methods to analyze questions. Lastly here, we'll talk about the timing. We are currently accepting submissions on a rolling basis. We will compile issues once we have enough paper for an issue. Right now, we are aiming for about 2 issues a year, one about the start of the year and the other one about the middle of the year in the summer. We did have a couple of hiccups, but we are now back to operating on about a 6 to 8 week timeline from when submissions are sent in to then we get reviews or the desk evaluations back to the authors. The desk evaluations will come back much quicker than that if they're not sent out for review. But at this time, we will now open questions. We have one question already in the question and answer, and I will start off answering this and allow my colleagues to chime in. With that, there was a question here about elaborating how we seek to disrupt the traditional hierarchical models of journal governance and management. I think when I think about this, a couple different things that comes to mind. One, we are an independent journal. We are not affiliated with a publisher. We are not affiliated with any particular professional associations. We do have affiliations with 2 groups, as noted before, but we are completely independent. Second, we are seeking to develop a community. The journal is just one part of this. That's sort of the anchor of it in my mind. But we are looking to develop a lot of community events and community practices. And we will be rolling out, hopefully over the next year here, more of these events, webinars, things like that. At different conferences, we are doing some meetups. And so I think it's also time that we can meet each other and have conversations and hopefully further collaborations. But I'll open the floor here to my co-editors here if they want to add anything to that particular question.
I can jump in and add one more thing to what Charlie articulated there. When I saw this question, the first thing that came to mind for me was our editor rotation, which is not normal for a traditional journal. Instead of having one single editor-in-chief who is the lead of the journal
Mm.
conducting this webinar, you are seeing four of us, and that is intentional on our part. So there are four of us who collectively are making the decisions and making strategic decisions about the journal and its future, and what happens next. We will be rotating in terms of lead editor. So each of us will take a quarter of the year starting in January. And that is more organizationally on our part. It is helpful to have someone who is responsible for scheduling meetings and making sure that the day-to-day activities of the journal continue to move forward. But when it comes to big decisions about the journal, those are group decisions rather than the decision of just a single person. Sylvie, I saw you were unmuted. It looks like you have something to add as well.
Yeah, just a couple of things, but I hadn't thought of any of those, so it's great to hear different people's perspectives. I think the other thing that we've tried to do in building out the editorial board is to have an open call. So we had, as we mentioned on the slides, we had an open call for section editors, assistant editors, and associate editors that we promoted globally. And that went through a round of selection based on really open criteria. So we were aiming to be as maximally inclusive and diverse as possible from the outset. We have also put a fair amount of work into our assistant editors. The reason we mentioned earlier that they are doing the bulk of the reviews is so that you know that they have been trained in working with global scholars and an understanding of decolonial approaches. One of the ways that we've tried to embed this in its sort of simplest and most symbolic form is in our inclusive language policy, which says that you can submit in any form of global English. We aspire eventually to be working multilingually once we have the ability to review in multiple languages. And we've already had some questions coming in of can I have a multilingual abstracts? And our answer is absolutely. We would love that. At the moment, we can't support submissions in languages other than English, but within global Englishes, we would like to be as inclusive as possible. And, the guarantee that I hope we would be able to make as an editorial board is that you will never receive a review from our journal that says this should be proofread by a native English speaker. That's a sort of touchstone, I think, of where we want to be in terms of inclusivity, and that aspiration is broadened out from language to include epistemologies, research methods, and suitable topics for research.
And the last thing I will add to this is touching on kind of what was said earlier, we do have a planned rotation, and that there are going to be new people coming on to the assistant editors, associate editors, section editors, and even as editors of the journal. We do not plan to stay here forever. We want to build this and let it grow, and then hopefully organically keep growing and keep moving and taking shape. And it really, the community development of this is at its core in my mind. So, the second question that came in here is looking at. This is a very good question. This is about submitting to the journal, beginning of your publishing journey. The supervisor has recommended to publish in established journals. However, this journal aligns with a lot of your professional and research interest. And so this is one of those that in my mind, it's a little bit of a balancing act, but how you want to present this, that this is a journal in the field that you are interested in pursuing. This is a journal that prescribes to sort of the ethos of how you want to conduct your work and develop it. Both our connections to RISI and the critical internationalization. This is one of those that this is a supporting mechanism for publications in that way, and that this is a valued by those communities outlet, a valued outlet. So I'll open up the floor to others who want to speak to that question there.
I think I would just add, I think we absolutely recognize that as a brand new journal that we don't yet have the quality markers of prestige that other more established journals do within the field. We do have a game plan to achieve those markers of quality. Many of them, such as SSCI ranking or Web of Science indexing, those take a little bit of time because you have to apply and demonstrate the degree of publication within them. So I think one thing I would say is we do have kind of a 3 to 5 year plan of maintaining status markers of quality for the journal. So even if we don't have them now, we hope to have them in the next few years' time. But I think at the same time, we are really reflective that for a lot of scholars, publishing in our journal is more of a risk than it is for other scholars, particularly those who are early career researchers who are writing their first publications, colleagues in many national contexts around the world where there may be requirements on your publication where your work is published. And in that regards, I think our advice would be, of course, we do see huge value in publishing in our journal because of its connections with critical networks and in terms of visibility of your work. But we do recognize that at this stage in your work, you may need to balance that a little bit. So my suggestion with a supervisor hat on would be publish in both to consider developing your budding reputation in terms of journals who do have those markers of quality, but also engaging with our critical communities in hopes again in a few years' times we will have those same markers, those qualities of all of the other journals within the field. But I think, there is a question, a mentorship question in terms of protecting yourself and your future career that we completely understand and would probably give similar feedback as supervisors. But I think what we do offer is visibility in terms of having tight-knit communities of people who are doing high quality critical work. And sometimes that can offer you just as much foot in the door as a publication in a journal that has the highest possible citation factor within our discipline.
I'm really glad to hear you give that advice, Jenna, because when I saw this question, I was like, well, if I put my mentor hat on, my advice is to do both. Um, and really, I don't know exactly at what career stage you're at, or, if you are still a PhD student or if you've graduated and moved on to your first role post PhD. But really, at that stage, any publication is a good publication. And really, the idea is to get your name out there. And so, my recommendation, if you were my student, would be to do both.
Now, I would just add one more thing which might help to convince a supervisor, which is the fact that we're fully open access, that there are no fees charged at any stage. Open access work gets cited and read better. It'll be easier to share and promote your work in our journal than in some journals that are behind paywalls.
Yep. There was a question that came in the chat. I do think Sylvie answered it. But just to be clear, yes, we will be willing to accept public submissions from dissertations from PhD research. We do ask that it follows the guidelines in whichever format, whether it's a research article, practice-based critical reflection, to follow those guidelines. But yeah, absolutely, this is something that we are interested in and supporting. The next question in the Q&A, talking about the support new authors can get before the submission. How is the feedback delivered? The feedback is delivered in text. It is written feedback. It will be given, typically we try to give it as a separate document, so that it's not, we try not to provide feedback on papers and reviews in text, if you will, but that it is a separate document that it will give both substantive and then theoretical and methodological comments for the continuing development there. One of the ones that have come through or that I've seen already, there was a lot of feedback on connecting the theory to the research design, that it was there, but being more clear and explicit. That it was one of the kind of the feedback that came through on that particular one. So, but mainly though, it comes back in a form of a Word document, and that you can take a look at it and then add to it. Anyone else want to add to comments about the development?
Just to say, I think if you have never experienced peer review before, this can be a nice, gentle introduction. So I know a lot of the early career researchers that I work with, for example, often feel a bit anxious about the peer review process. This is purposefully intended to be a supportive, friendly space. So if that is your situation, and maybe you just want some guidance and clarity on the direction of the work before you make a formal submission, we really would encourage it, as it is intended to be a supportive step. We do ask, if you go through the developmental review, that you do end up submitting your final article for peer review to our journal. I did have a question from someone recently that asked, could they do the developmental review through us and then submit the article elsewhere? If we are going to put the time and the effort into giving a developmental review, we would love to see your paper end up in the journal eventually. So we do just ask, if you're going through that approach, that you are thinking seriously about submitting the article eventually, as a fully reviewed article into the journal.
And with that, the review that you get back, the feedback, it's not the intention to be have a response from the author to the specific points. Again, this is feedback given to the authors, that this is, designed to help the authors think about their piece, help it develop. But it's not necessarily like in a review process that you have to respond to the reviews and answer that and demonstrate that response.
And perhaps worth clarifying, when you do the developmental review and then you submit your paper for the full peer review process, it is a different set of reviewers. So your original developmental reviewer will not be the peer reviewer of your paper when it comes to being submitted again.
Yes. Are there more questions that we can answer from people?
If colleagues would like to voice a question, I believe you can raise your hand or put a note in the chat and I can invite you to speak.
There is a question now in the Q&A, is asking, if I do not choose the developmental route, is there a chance that editors nominate my paper for that route instead of desk rejecting? That is a possibility. We would always ask your consent. If we
First,
had, if we saw a paper that we felt had great potential but is not quite there yet, we would contact authors to ask, would you be willing to consider your paper for a developmental route? We think it has high potential for the journal, but needs a little bit more development. But that would always be your choice. If you wanted to say no, you would prefer to take the paper elsewhere, that's completely your prerogative. But it is a potential for those papers that, we see good potential for, but still need a little bit of work.
And just a note so far that we have had several cases so far for open submissions where we have desk rejected rather than recommending the developmental route. And that's where the underpinning research doesn't align with the criteria that Jenna explained earlier in terms of what we do or don't accept. So if a research project has already been completed, for example, that is based on a deficit framing or that lacks a global lens or seems repetitive of substantive areas of existing research, in those cases, we would typically be recommending a desk rejection. If it's a paper where the underpinning research looks great and looks relevant, but the presentation, the structure, the style needs work, that's when we would be likely to recommend a developmental review route. Our aspiration with this route is to try to compensate a little bit for colleagues globally who may not have strong research mentors in the space of global higher education and may not have access to institutional support or to collegial networks who can give you that kind of behind the scenes peer review. So that's the primary function of that route.
There's a question that came in the chat here. Yep. Yep. Yeah, about the quality markers and submitting there. Yeah, we have a plan in place, as mentioned earlier, to try to hit those markers, but it is a 3 to 5 year process to get there. And so we are on our path. We are aiming for that to allow that. We know in certain parts of the world, there's also authors who cannot look necessarily publish with us because of those particular markers, because of the requirements for their positions, some promotion and things like that. So, but yeah, we are, to go back to earlier, to reinforce that, really, we encourage try to do both, publish in with us, but then also in those journals that are established, and then that will allow for us to grow as a journal, but then also it would hopefully get us to that point where we hit those numbers well.
Another consideration for colleagues who are in that situation where there are required quality markers for publication for your program or for your place of employment, is that we do have the smaller sections like the critical reflection section, which is actually a really good space for people to be writing more conceptually reflective pieces that probably wouldn't be accepted in other journals because of the kind of short structure of that section. So if you were wanting to contribute to the community, but you had, you're under pressure to publish in the highest ranking journals possible, then that critical reflection section might be a way of contributing in a way that is not a huge amount of extra labor for you. So that would be a consideration.
There's a new question that came in about publishing as an independent researcher. We are very open to that. We're happy to work with you and for your representation, how you want to be represented. So if you want to be as an independent researcher, we can certainly go that route that way for you. We want to be supportive. And I think this goes back to something with the first question that came in about this. The aim of us coming together initially was to create a community, to create a substantive community, if you will, that we can grow and thrive together. We really value that, and we have been very intentional, not only in the practice of what this journal is doing and how it's gone about, but also in thinking about how to keep this going after we move on and allow the journal to keep growing and develop. And so this is, I think, at the forefront there. But with that question there specifically, yes, we're happy to work with you or any authors on how you want to be represented in the journal. So there's a new question here, submitting work from one of these routes. Yep. The editor sees that it's aligned to another route. Can we suggest it? Again, I think we would work with the authors if we as editors see a manuscript that comes in and say, hey, this might be a better fit over here. We will talk with you first. We will not arbitrarily make that decision without consultation with you as the author. But it is something, though, that if we do see that, we would definitely open up that opportunity for the authors.
But just to flag that because of the limitations in the way the website works, that
Yes.
might come back to you as a desk rejection. So this is what we've done already with a couple of papers. It has been on paper a desk rejection because we can say, well, this doesn't meet our current standards for sending it out to review for this section, but we'd love to see it in this framing. Please resubmit it according to these criteria. So it could still say rejection, but actually we're very open to that route.
Yes, so please read the notes.
And I'll also add to that just based on what we've seen so far, it is a bit more common for a manuscript to go from the practice to the critical section and vice versa, rather than go from being a research submission to one of the two other sections, just because of length, first and foremost. The research papers are quite a bit longer than the papers in the other two sections. And there is also a bit of overlap between the other two sections, the practice and the critical sections, where there might be a bit of a bit of a blurrier line between what makes the difference between a manuscript and one or the other.
And just to add, we're very happy to receive questions via our email. So if you have, a title or an abstract and you're wondering which section does that go in, if you send an email to us, we're happy to give advice.
At this time, there's no pending questions that I can see. Is there more coming from the participants here?
I'm going to stop the recording.